Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. John Lloyd CBE is an author, television and radio comedy producer and writer whose career highlights reads like a veritable honours list of great British comedy classics. His work includes the likes of Not the 9 O'Clock News, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Spitting Image, Blackadder and QI. He is the presenter of BBC Radio 4's The Museum of Curiosity and producer of the award-winning podcast No Such Thing as a Fish. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. First and foremost, John Lloyd, welcome to the Astrology Podcast. Terrific to have you on as my guest, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the details of what has proven to be, as I read, a fascinating career that you continue to enjoy. But as is customary with all things astrology, I like to start with the early days. And as I understand it, and if my research hasn't let me down, that you were born in Kent, in Dover, and your father was a captain in the Royal Navy. So I would imagine that would have led to something of a nomadic childhood in many ways. So tell me, what was childhood, and where was childhood for you?
It was all over the place, Lee, metaphorically and actually. So yeah, I was born in Dover, and then what happened? My father then went to sea for about 2 years, leaving my mum with me just under 3 and my twin brother and sister. Then she took me to Gibraltar, where my father was stationed. And then we came back and we lived in another place in Kent. And then my father was posted to Canada, working for NATO. So that was amazing at 5 to see a supermarket for the first time, a fridge. I'd never seen a fridge before. And see the, groaning shelves of Canadian breakfast cereal and biscuits and all that. And the amazing weather, the tornadoes and the snow in the winter and the hot summers on the lake and all that. Amazing.
Whereabouts in Canada were you?
We were in Kingston, Ontario. I can't say anything more about it. I've never researched it since, but it's it's a smallish, it's not like Toronto or any sort of giant city, sort of medium-sized city, I guess. But it's still Technicolor for me. I can see it in my mind's eye as if it was just round the corner. So that was an amazing experience. So we came back to England again. And the next thing we did was we went to Malta when I was about 8. Another amazing country, completely different, obviously tiny little island. Very sort of simple existence. We're just wandering around in shorts mainly. And I remember collecting lolly sticks off the street. That was the thing that me and my friend used to do, which would be unheard of now, that kind of, carelessness. And, I remember as a child, you were sort of allowed to go anywhere, really. At 7, I was getting on the bus to go to school on my own in South London. But people didn't seem to be so anxious about everything in those days. I think it possibly because one's parents had just come through the war and they were lucky to be alive. I remember my parents' generation generally were very cheerful people. They sort of thought, yeah, we got through that. Let's make the most of our lives. I think that they'd had such terrible experiences, both of them, that just to be around was enough, really. Yeah, so all that, a very nomadic existence, different school all the time. Not much school, actually, because we were often on troop ships on long journeys or looking for houses or looking for schools, So I didn't really go properly to school in any sort of serious way until I was nearly 10, sort of 9 and a half, I suppose, when I was packed off to prep school. And that awful thing that your parents drive away in the car and you're not going to see them for 10 years, really. No, you are, but, on rare occasions, Anyway, so very peripatetic, very interesting. It's amazing to be 8 and to speak a bit of Maltese, And I think it's gave me first of all, a very open attitude towards anywhere abroad. I actually, in some ways, feel more at home abroad than I do here. I always like to keep moving. And I feel uncomfortable sitting in the same place for too long. And also it makes me I'm very, very open, always have been, to other languages, cultures. I like people from everywhere. I think people are much more similar than they are different. The cultural differences are only surface, And also, I think I've never thought of myself until I started QI as being particularly curious, but I think that goes in deep as a child, that your curiosity is being continually fed. When I finally went to prep school, as far as I'm aware, I was the only person in the school who could swim, because every Canadian kid can swim. Of course they can. They jump in the lake or whatever. But it was a new thing where they all had to be taught at 9 to swim. And, I've got a very good ear for languages. And my mum used to teach us, really, because we've so little schooling. She'd teach us in the form of quizzes, be sitting on some deck of some, tatty old troop ship on deck chairs, playing deck quoits, and then doing quizzes about name 3 trees beginning with E, that kind of stuff, So for a child, all children are born curious. This is an obsession with me, that under 5, children want to know everything. They're fascinated by leaves and grass and rabbits and all that. And then somehow something happens around 7 or 8 where they sort of stop being curious. And that goes on for most people most of their lives. It's very odd. Whereas because I was so constantly stimulated, it stayed with me. I think, and you can see QI embedded in there right from, because that's really all QI is. It's like a child going, "Look, Daddy, a leaf. Oh, look at this. Look at the veins on this thing. What's that?" That's all it is, really.
I wonder what, that's a really interesting observation, that to have had such an eclectic mix of rich experiences as a child, the like of which I suspect many wouldn't have enjoyed in the same way, particularly around differing cultures and even physically geographic experiences. I wonder, actually, it's an interesting insight into education, and at what point, to your point, that sort of north of 5 type of curiosity, does it get squeezed out of us, or do we start to conform as a consequence of the more rigid structures through which we start to find ourselves? Or is that actually, it's the whole nature-nurture debate? It's an interesting thought.
It's one of the things, Lee, that has fascinated me for a long time, which is, as far as we know, it's a moot point when humanity emerged from, as a separate branch, but it's somewhere between 1 million and 250,000 years ago that you got properly Homo sapiens people. And as far as we can tell, human nature has not changed at all in all that time. Look, we can fly to the moon, for heaven's sake, but you still can't keep a marriage together under pressure, You still shout at your children for spilling their Rice Krispies, which should be funny, not a matter for fury, And so we're sort of caught in this kind of wheel, And just having been on a yoga retreat where they're talking about the samsara, the wheel of fate, the turning round, I feel often have felt caught in a kind of a sort of mechanism, where you have the illusion of free will, but actually you're being sort of manipulated, mainly by your own mind, in fact. And it's trying to get out of that personal prison that you build for yourself is the big journey of life, really, to reach one's full potential, to become a properly rounded person, rather than to be caught in, all the traps of prejudice and assumption and mood, that sort of thing are, and it's one of the things about the fixed nature of human personality is that, your bicycle gets a flat tire. Yeah, so, okay, you either take it to a shop where a man who knows about bicycles, or you've got your own puncture repair. It's not difficult to fix a puncture, you fix it. You don't just throw the bike away or go, "Oh, I'll have to ride it with a flat tire then." With a person, you go, "Well, that's just the way I am, innit? I'm just angry. I'm an angry sort of person." Or, I'm very depressed. I have to take drugs. I'm very depressed all the time, Well, stop it. I'm not saying, when you've got clinical depression, it's obviously a very, very serious thing. It's a terribly serious thing at the moment. But an awful lot of low-level depression, which I suffered from for a long time, is actually, it's just a kind of, wallowing, isn't it? It's a kind of self-pity. Oh, my life's so rubbish, Do
you think it's just part of the human experience? It's just, rightly or wrong, and to your point, if there is issues around very serious issues around clinical depression aside, that actually that sense of the ups and downs and the meanderings of life, some of which, the highs can be very high, the lows can be very low, but actually that's just about being a human being. It's the human experience.
Well, evidently, but why? That's what obsesses me. How did we get here and what should we do about it? Those are the two big questions. All the questions we ask at QI, hundreds every day, thousands probably. All the thousands of things that you think about stuff, the way the chatter in your mind that goes round and round, and all the regrets and the fear and the kind of resentment and the forward planning that comes to nothing, and the worry about things that may happen, aren't going to, and all that burbling that goes on. It's like having 6 radios on in your head often, isn't it, really? I can hear yours going from here, He's going on, why doesn't he shut up, get on with it, let's get on to the funny programs,
But even to your point about let's get on to the funny stories, but even as I understand it, and I don't know that it's uniquely British, but if you look at some of the darkest events that happen through life, oftentimes the British response to which is to laugh at it or to see a lot of our TV comedies have often come from quite dark places. I'm jumping the gun a little, but if you look at the success that you enjoyed, for example, with Blackadder Goes Forth, or what a wonderful series that was, one of my favourites. But actually it comes from a time, the First World War, that was one of the darkest times in British history in many ways. And yet there's an opportunity to find light and comedy and humour from it. And I think that in itself is part of life's rich experiences. You talk, though, in terms of the career that you've enjoyed within comedy or from a comedic perspective. But when do you recall first developing an interest in comedy? Was there a point at which, through perhaps growing up, there were radio shows or TV shows you watched, listened to, books you read, comics you read, whatever? Where did that influence first start to evidence?
I always remember, sometimes when I get a bit down, which doesn't happen that much, I've spent a lot of time trying to resist the temptation to wallow in my own misery, try and get out of that. It's taken a long time, but I'm quite good at it now. So I don't get low very often. But when I do, I sometimes think, oh no, it's going, this is rubbish. This situation. I hate this. And I'm thinking, but was it any better in my 50s? Oh no. 40s? No. 30, I'm thinking back through the decades. And I have to go right back to, before 9, I was, I reckon, pretty cheerful, happy sort of kid. I remember childhood with very great affection and very little bad things happened. But otherwise, it's been a fantastic struggle. I mean, a great deal of pressure and all sorts of, difficult things have happened. You say the human experience, it's like oftentimes when I was doing things like producing Spitting Image and, one year I worked a 90-day shift with 2 days off in the middle. I used to get 3-4 hours sleep a night, if that, less. I have to get up at 5:30 and read all the papers. My life was completely falling to bits, And I often used to say, all I want to do is lie on a piece of grass and look at a tree, or give me a job. I'll do anything. Just something I'm capable of, a milkman, a postman, sort of a job with, apart from yappy dogs, not much jeopardy, regular, not a lot of money, but secure and safe, and easy, a friendly job that is not, brickbats coming at me every day, opening the paper to read another hideous article about yourself, But I think that wave patterns is a thing in the universe, isn't it? Whether light is a wave or a particle, waves of the sea. Wave forms are key to the way the universe is constructed. And I think for reasons we don't understand, you can have, these waves have to be balanced, peaks and troughs have to be equal. That's how they work. And I think you've got an option, or maybe it's not an option, it's a compulsion to either have a waveform which is very steep, very up and down like this, which is my life, enormous lows and enormous highs. Fantastic things, wonderful things have happened to me and really awful things. Or you can opt for a low curve, a shallow curve where, you don't have a lot of excitement, but you don't have a lot of disaster either. But they sort of balance out.
I think of it as almost as a frequency. Think of it in frequencies terms. And we have a choice around oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes how far we might wish to stretch those frequencies. So I think that therefore, as a consequence, if you accept that your bandwidth is going to be, the peaks and troughs arguably are high, then you accept that that's a way that eventually that's the way you live your life. If you make a choice to ensure that your frequency is in the middle, not everybody has that choice, arguably, but if you make that choice to have a fairly median frequency, then you accept, as you say, the highs won't be particularly high, but therefore the lows won't be particularly quite as low. That they're actually you'll bubble along very safely, very securely in the middle, and possibly as a consequence have a very fulfilling and happy life. So it's interesting that I think it's the old adage, different strokes for different folks. We all have a different way of wanting to adjust our lives accordingly.
The thing is, your podcast talks meet a lot of people who are very successful, conventionally in the well-regarded sense. But certainly the latter part of my life, the last 25 years or so, is like people who want to be successful and who want to achieve, conventional success, to become president, to become managing director, to win prizes, to get rich, to have more cars than they need, all that stuff, to have a lot of money they won't be able to spend. This is looking in the wrong direction. Those things don't ultimately count in any meaningful way. And certainly it's true. I used to be, in my gap year, I was a builder for an Essex jobbing builder. So I was long hair, dirty shoes, toff, hippie, builder bloke, driving the van and picking up the cement and all that. It was brilliant. The best job I've ever had, that 9-10 months with the lads, being teased and learning to do things really well. I loved that. And some of the happiest people I know are people in that area, craftsmen, painters and decorators. You're doing a job which is actually highly skilled, but it's not frightening. Do you know what I mean? Rubbing down a door and getting the undercoat right and getting the line exactly straight is a delightful experience. And I, of course, am very appreciative when I see a bloke doing a job well. I go, that's great. Somebody said, whatever you do, you should do it to the best of your ability. So if you're a coach driver, you should be the best coach driver, the most cheerful, helpful coach driver there is. And that's enough. That's good. It's much better than being a really shit prime minister, of squandering the opportunity for personal reasons of personal vanity and gain and worrying about what other people think of you and all that rubbish. So I'll tell you a story, Lee, about, this is a typical mad thing that's happened to me, one of the junctions of my life. So in the 90s, and late 80s, I was a commercials director. And I wouldn't claim to be good at many things, but I was really good at that. Something about the pedantic, tiny nature of making a film that's between 30 seconds and a minute long really suits my temperament. I like to carve, an ivory elephant the size of on the head of a pin kind of thing. And the first few years was really good fun, and I really liked doing it. And my show reel used to go around Hollywood as, this bloke is worth talking to about maybe doing a movie. So I got flown to Hollywood, turned up at Heathrow, and I said to the person at the desk, I hope I'm not going cattle all the way to LA, am I? She says, no, first, sir. Ooh, going first. I'd never been first class before. So I went first class to Hollywood, and I didn't really expect very much. So Leslie Nielsen picks me up from the airport in his own Jag, waiting at the gate. What? So we go to the Paramount lot, and they've hidden guys in the bushes going, hey, are you John Lloyd? I love your work, man. It was just ridiculous. They were so desperate to get me to shoot. It was Naked Gun 33 1/3 I was up for.
I was going to say, was this around about the Naked Gun or Police Squad? Wasn't he? Was that post that era?
Yeah, it was because I'd done 4, I think, ads with Leslie based on the jokes of Police Squad, which were very good, and they won lots of prizes. He was a great guy. So we go to Hollywood and we have dinner with John Travolta. I'm living the dream, and then I go and meet Sherry Lansing, who's head of the studio, is a great woman, and she says, well, I know the script's not that great, John, but if you just shoot this, we just need to do it for the banks. They need they need a third one in the franchise. It's going to take, 50, 100 million, even if it's terrible. If you just shoot it for us, then next time you can do what you want. Be doing us a favor. And believe it or not, I was the only director in the world they could find that the studio approved of. Leslie Nielsen wanted to work with, and the Zucker brothers, the producer-director team, wanted as well. I was the only one they could find. They were desperate for me to do it. No, the script was terrible. They wouldn't let me rewrite it. There was a lot of kerfuffle. I called my wife and I said, will you bring the kids over to Hollywood? And she said, oh, no, darling, they just started nursery school. We're really, you go ahead, and if you want to do this, fine. And I was, it was a difficult moment for me. I didn't know what to do. I called my agent. He didn't really know what to do either. He thought it was rubbish. Well, maybe we should do it. So I went home and I turned it down. I said to my agent, just say, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to do a bad film. And also the money was scale, as they say. It's your bog standard, the cheapest you can pay a director under union rules. So my agent calls up the next day and he says, John, they've doubled the money. Doubled the money? Yeah, he said, yeah, they really want you to do it. And Leslie would call up in the middle of the night and he'd say, John, we're like a pot of whales, man, a pot of whales. We'll support each other. We'll look after you, man. Come on, you got to do this picture, And I said no. And then next day my agent rings up and he says, they've doubled the money again. I said, what? I said, okay, if it gets to $1 million, I'll do it. And in fact, it didn't. It got to $880,000 for the job. And then they pulled the rug. So anyway, I was struggling with this thing. I did not know what to do because, when I was out in Hollywood, Mel Smith was out there trying to get a movie. He shot about 5 movies. That was all he really wanted to do. And he was a great friend of mine, Mel. So I go up to his house for a drink and I say, they've offered me this picture and it's a terrible script and I don't think I can do it. And Mel said, you are crazy. What are you doing? You've been offered a Hollywood Paramount movie on a plate and you're saying no? He really wouldn't speak to me after that. He thought I was mad. So I went home and for only twice in my life have I done the I Ching. Do you know what that is?
No.
It's an ancient Chinese oracle. It's called the Book of Changes. And what you do is you throw coins, and depending on the combination of heads or tails, it leads you to a piece of 5,000-year-old Chinese philosophy to help you make a decision of some kind. Okay, and I threw these coins, and I turned up a thing that was called Hexagram 1, and it's called The Creative. So I'm reading this thing, which is not personally addressed to me, but my goodness, it said, this is about a man, a human being, who is faced with a dilemma, either to go across the sea to do a big and important job, or to stay home and undertake the internal journey. I didn't really even know what that meant at the time, but that was my calling. Either go and become conventionally successful in Hollywood or stay home and fix myself. Fix the mess that I was in those days, So that's what I did. But when I turned this thing up, it was completely uncanny. I felt this book was speaking to me, from beyond the ages with a personal message. Anyway, it ends. One of the famous phrases in the I Ching is no blame. So that's what it ended with, no blame. In other words, whatever you decide is the right thing. It doesn't matter either way.
What was it that led you to the I Ching? Had someone talked to you about it? Had someone suggested that might be a route through which you could make a decision? How did you become familiar with it?
I can't remember. It was just one of those things, because I wasn't a philosophical person. I've always been interested in stuff, but I hadn't really read any philosophy or thought about life very much. I was too busy, my first job at 22, first proper job after being a builder in a gap year and working a flour mill and stuff, was as a radio producer, trainee radio producer, age 22. And between then and, pretty much 38, 39, I just worked all the time. I didn't have time to think about whether anything that I was doing was important or what I was like as a person or, how to bring up children or anything like that. You're just doing stuff.
And how had you ended up? Because as I understood, so you studied law at university.
Yeah.
I think, was it Footlights was your first introduction to, well, as I read, but your first introduction to Douglas Adams. You became friends as a consequence of that university connection. Is that right? But that you read law, which would suggest, or not to make any assumption, and clearly you're a great example of the folly of doing that, but that therefore the original sort of perhaps path in life was a more traditional, formal, professional one of becoming a lawyer. What made you make the switch? You go from lawyer to a gap year as a builder, having a great time, to which you've already alluded, becoming a radio producer. What was the journey from studying law to Footlights and then a career in radio?
Well, you know, Lee, I know you've done a lot of these things, and I think I'd like to try and say some things that might help other people rather than me saying about how great I am, which is not what I think in any case. So what I can say is, like, a lot of things that have happened to me that seemed like disasters at the time turned out to be the best thing that ever happened. And nearly all the things I've done have been as a direct result of being sacked by somebody, a girlfriend, a boss, a friend, from some project, which has kick-started me into having to do something else. That's nearly always what happens, because I'm quite lazy and driven by resentment. So if somebody kicks me, you know, gives me the sack unfairly, then I get very, very determined. When I was a kid, I was a very keen rugby player as a hooker. I used to love playing rugby, but the only way I could do it was to get really angry, because that's a silly thing, you know, running around trying to catch people by the legs. And, you know, particularly in the scrum, you know, as a hooker, you're always, you know, you've always got half the rugby football team on you. You know, the scrum collapses and you're underneath. And my shins are like corrugated iron. You know, we didn't wear shin pads in those days. It would be considered sissy, you know. So my shins have been kicked so much that the bone has got holes in it, you know, all the way down. But that's so. I went up to university to read law because I thought that it was important to do something that I did have a kind of idea to be a crusading barrister, you know, defending the Islington Nine, that kind of stuff. But it was pretty inchoate, and I really did it because I was fed up with doing history. And I thought there's a bit of a Presbyterian in me, because I found the school work that I was good at, things like English and history and the humanities, basically quite easy. You know, I could pass exams without really reading the set books. I don't know how. It was just a trick, you know. And I thought, this can't be right. I do have, much, much later, I didn't know this at the time, but the Navajo have a proverb which they say, everything easy is evil, everything difficult is good. So if things are going badly, that's a sign, that's good, you're going the right direction. If it's too easy, this is not right. I have that kind of built into me naturally. So I went up to university. I didn't expect to go to Cambridge. I actually wanted to go to Liverpool to read politics, or Sussex to read, you know, literature or something. But since you got offered to go to Cambridge, I had to go. And again, it's another thing I would say, beware auspicious beginnings, you know. It's like, I didn't want to go to Cambridge. I didn't think I'd get on, and I was wrong. It was the best, you know, one of the great experiences of my life. That 3 years, I was incredibly happy. And as a person born in Dover from a very middle sort of middle class family, not upper, not lower, just in the middle, and not particularly, my dad was a pretty successful naval officer, but we weren't known as a family for, you know, hundreds of years of achievements or anything. It gave me a terrific sense of possibility. I met people whose parents had done amazing things, you know, who were amazing people themselves. And he thought, I could do anything. Anything is possible. So I really owe Trinity Cambridge for that. Anyway, but it was clear within 2 weeks that the law wasn't for me. I didn't really get it. I didn't find it interesting. And I knew I'd made a mistake by being arrogant and not taking the advice from my school of go to Oxford to read history. You'll like that. I said no as an act of willful defiance. You know, I was quite a bolshy teenager. So they wouldn't let me change to English, which is what I should have done, or history. So I had to sit out doing the law. And as a result, I worked very hard at Cambridge, but not at the law at all. I did almost no law. I got a very bad third. I think I scraped in by like 1 mark. But I worked very hard at everything else. So I did student journalism. I ran the college picture lending scheme, amazing art that everyone could borrow for free for their room. I did some straight acting. I ruined a couple of straight plays by getting laughs which I didn't mean to get, and broke the director's heart, particularly La Machine Infernale by Jean Cocteau, where I played Anubis, the jackal-headed god. And I used to come on in this very badly made papier-mâché dog's head, and the audience would howl. It got round the whole university. There's this arse called Lloyd who's playing in La Machine Infernale. It's absolutely hilarious. He's hopeless. So I stopped straight acting after that and thought, okay, I'm going to concentrate on comedy, which I'd always loved. You asked earlier my influences. I mean, because I was growing up in the 50s before I went away to school, we listened to the radio. We didn't really have a telly. There wasn't any point. We kept moving house, and so we had a radio on all the time. So I listened to the radio. The whole family used to love things like Round the Horn and the Navy Lark and the Clitheroe Kid, all those classic things you can probably hear on Radio 4 Extra now. That's where my sense of humour comes from. That my dad was a pretty funny guy. But we all used to laugh a lot. I remember just being helpless, giggling in church and, tea shops in Petersfield and all that kind of thing, sort of stiff post-war Britain. Very little money, everything grey, mince and, boiled potatoes, no fruit, very rare to sweets, National Health milk, that kind of stuff. Quite colourless, and lots of bomb craters everywhere that you could play in, full of water, But we laughed a lot. And I remember when I started going to school, I realised I could do funny voices. I could do the teachers, and, I've got an album somewhere by Peter Sellers called Songs for Swinging Sellers, and I could do all the voices on that, So that's where I ended up. My last year, I really spent the whole year writing sketches. As a result, I got into Footlights, just sort of scraped in. There were 8 people in the Footlights. And then they used to take every year the Footlights to Edinburgh, but they could only take 6 people because the budget wasn't big enough. And also, all the cast who went, all the 6 out of 8, had to also be in the straight play by the Cambridge University Dramatic Society. So you'd do Footlights in the evening, and in the afternoons you'd be in the Chekhov or the Ibsen, And the director, Stephen Wyatt, who's a really nice guy, took me to the pub and he said, "John, you can't come to Edinburgh." I said, "What?" No, because to get into Footlights is amazing. And if you've had that thing, it was a really funny show to go out there alone. I did a monologue about punting, I remember. To go out on your own and have hundreds of people yelling with laughter is the best thing. I was hooked, completely hooked. So it was a disaster for me being sacked from the Footlights. And I said, "Why, Stephen?" He said, "Well, that Machine Infernale thing you did. I can't take the risk that you'll do that to the Chekhov, because I just can't take the risk." And I honestly, I thought I was going to cry. And he could see that I was about to lose it. And he took pity on me. He said, "Look, I tell you what, we've been offered this radio show by Radio 4. You can do that. You could be in that. How about that? There's only 5 going to be in that." I said, "Oh, okay." And I broke my heart. But amazingly, again, you don't always get what you want. You get what you need, I found my vocation. And I suddenly remembered, as soon as I started working in radio, this is where I'm from. I used to love radio, much more than telly. I'm full of it. I know all the shows, So I was completely hooked on that. And then a guy comes in to the writer's room and says, "You come in my office." I said, "Okay. Would you like to be a producer?" And I go, "No, not really. What do they do?" They all, because all the producers then, they were all very nice chaps, and they had lovely tweed suits. They were all, I suppose they must have been in their 50s, but they looked like they were 90 to me. I shared an office with a very nice fellow. And he said, "I've got my vintner popping by, John, if you don't mind. He's got some very nice sherries he's going to show me. And then later on, my tailor will be popping by, measure me up for a nice tweed suit." So I said, "I don't want to be one of those guys. I want to be a writer-performer." And the guy says, "Well, that's fine. You can write as well. I tell you what, we'll call you a trainee producer and staff writer. How about that?" I said, "Okay, right." I was very, very poor. I had no money at all, so I had to do it, really. And then so I'm 22 and I'm a producer. And I said, "Well, what do they do?" He said, "Well, just make stuff you like." I go, is that it? He said, yeah, that's pretty much it. Just make stuff you like. Because, I mean, if you don't like it, you can't really expect anyone else to. So that's what I've done all my life, really. That one simple thing. I've just done what I like. And some people agree with me. They also like that. And in modern broadcasting, that isn't the way it works. It doesn't work like that in politics either. It doesn't work like that in anything. People are not doing what they like. They're doing what they hope other people will like. That's why politicians say what they do, not because they think it's the right thing, but they think that people will vote for them. And people make programs because they think somebody, a real person, will like them. But it doesn't matter whether they like them or not.
At what point do you think that changed? And what perhaps was the catalyst for that change?
Well, I think it's all in the last 30 years, roughly. But it's a obsession with metrics, This happens from science, from politics, for media. If it can't be measured, it's not worth anything. If you can't say, so that's why it's very difficult to sell program ideas to people, because what creative people do is they're like explorers. They have a vision of something that may not even exist. They want to find the source of the Zambezi, which nobody doesn't even know which country it's in. They want to invent a cure for malaria, which may not be possible. But they have a vision, they have a dream, and you can't prove it. You can't prove that this idea of a political puppet show is going to be a huge success. It doesn't look like it because nobody's ever done anything like it before. So a lot of stuff that I did got in just under the wire where metrics weren't important because, most people in charge of telly, for example, were creative people, and they recognized that, you get a guy like Douglas Adams, who clearly half mad and half a genius, who's got this idea called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And you think, well, you look in his eyes, you think, well, he thinks it's a good idea. He clearly is passionate about it. Let's give it a go. That's the way it used to work, In the early 70s, we wrote a lot of science fiction. We were both science fiction nuts. We tried to pitch them to everyone. And they'd say things like, oh, science fiction, John, so 1950s. Very 1950s. It's very out of date. And this is like 2 years before Star Wars came out, So it has started happening, and it's always been there, that sort of slight attitude, no, that's not what people will like. And that's not important. The only way to make good anything is to do what you like. It's like people, they probably did, but I imagine people going to Van Gogh and saying, Vincent, sunflowers, it's so 17th century, isn't it? Sunflowers. Really, nobody wants those anymore. Irises? No, love, I don't think so. Got any vegetables? They're in. The Dutch are very good at vegetables. So, creativity is a lonely path, but it's Beethoven and Mozart and, anyone, Hockney. No artist is doing it because they're trying to please other people. It's nice if people like it, but they're trying to please themselves.
And does that concern you as to the direction of travel? Do you think that as a consequence that creativity is being stifled and squeezed out? Or do you think it's, I guess if I look at routes to market, there were historically only one of a small number of avenues available to you, whether that would have been through the BBC or whether it would through, if I look at my childhood, I think there were. I remember when Channel 4 came on stream. So I grew up with 3 channels on the television. So if you wanted that mainstream success, there was a relatively finite bandwidth that you could squeeze that success through and achieve it in the bigger picture sense. So arguably on the one hand, now we might suggest there appears to be greater conformity and greater, to your point, willingness to create something that someone else says people will like. Yet on the other hand, access to a wider world through social media or through whatever through these wonderful little things that sit in our palms that arguably are a blessing and a curse in equal measure, affords us an opportunity for me as an individual to get that creative content out to any one of a number of people. I mean, the podcast is an interesting mechanism. I once upon a time, the opportunity for a discussion, even 10 years ago, maybe not quite, but arguably 15, 20 years ago, this as an opportunity for conversation and discussion was not available. Now it is, and it's relatively inexpensive, cheap to produce, easy to push out to the wider world. So there's a slight conflict in my mind there. On the one hand, I'm thinking, is creativity being driven out? Or actually, is it just finding different routes? Is it being squashed out from one direction but finding a path through another?
That's very perceptive. And creativity is like a sort of aquifer, under the ground. It's always going to be there, and you can't suppress it. If you try and concrete over this bit, it will spring out. The leak will always occur. And if you think back in my sort of working life, going back to the 70s, in the 70s, in the 60s, really, radio started to kind of get very tired. Everybody who was anybody wanted to be in telly, where all the hot things were happening, and radio wasn't going through a great deal. Music after the 60s started to get a bit lost. In the mid-70s, it was great up to about 72. And then along comes punk rock, completely surprising. And despised probably by the average record company executive, but it just revivified everything. And then you got things like magazines, The Face. I remember when The Face first came out, so exciting, completely different kind of journalism. And at the same time, you've got the birth of alternative comedy. Comedy had been a very, very professional, but a very safe space. There were all these comedians who'd been there forever. They were all in their mid-50s. There was a certain kind of joke, which tended to be kind of slightly right of centre. We wouldn't be able to broadcast a lot of it now because of the current culture. And suddenly comedy was a young thing. It suddenly started exploding all over the place. There were people in their early 20s, producing, writing, being in things. And I think comedy's going through a not very good patch at the moment. It's great live. There's a lot of great stand-ups, but it's not really cutting the mustard in broadcasting. But you've got amazing drama, lots and lots of great drama, lots of, dark, exciting, really a golden age of television drama, I would say. So it's the balance we're talking about, You can't, not everything can be good at the same time. There has to be bad to have some good stuff. So, and podcasting, obviously, if you've got a culture of broadcasting which is over-policed and over-anxious, where everyone is, they're risk averse. They don't want, there's too many layers it's got to go through to get a commission. Podcasting is a balance to that, where there's no policing. You rise and fall on your own talent, your own self-belief, and having a good engineer and a bright editor with you helps. But there's so many, aren't there? I mean, how do you ever get through the noise, to get heard?
I think that's a fair point.
Whereas when you only had 3 channels, the glory of that was, of course, if you could get on, literally everybody saw it. The programs that I made in the 80s, Spitting Image used to get 15 million viewers every Sunday night. 2 minutes past 10 on a Sunday night, 15 million people every week. You've got to be kidding. It's not possible. I mean, nowadays, 3 million's a lot.
As you look back, was there a let's call it a body of work? I'm not sure that that's the right turn of phrase, but nonetheless, it's the one that springs to mind. But was there a show that you've produced, a series, the one of which that you had found to have been the most rewarding, the most fulfilling from your perspective, and I guess therefore arguably the one of which you're most proud?
Well, I hope this doesn't sound pious or cantish, but I try not to do pride. I might have thought that, in my 30s, but I'm much more I'm grateful to have been in the room with some of these things. And, I'm not kidding myself that I'm any kind of a genius. I'm just this. I think a lot of creative people have got something wrong with them. And what's wrong with me is I don't give up when any sensible person would quit, Most people say, this is use. I'm not going to do this. This is ridiculous. But I go on past the pain barrier, and it can be very, very painful and scary. But they're all different, it's great that Blackadder's lasted so long. It's as fresh today. In some ways, it feels better than it did at the time, because it's so not like anything that we make at the moment. Not that 9 o'clock news is amazing because, we were all young and we didn't know what we were doing, and it was very exciting and fresh. And Spitting Image is extraordinary because of the huge reach it had, that absolutely everybody saw it, from admirals to, prime ministers to members of the royal family. They all watched it. And, that was amazing. Didn't make any difference, of course. It had absolutely no effect on anybody, but it was nice.
But it felt like the first time that we'd started to poke fun at established society figures. That up until that point, there were. I'm trying to scratch through the memory banks, but I can't recall a time prior or a series prior to that would have been quite so obvious in its provocative nature of genuine figures who would have been held in high esteem from a global perspective, not only from a British one.
It felt, although it wasn't, I think it probably felt blunter and more vicious than there's always been. Since the 60s, you had Beyond the Fringe, where they, take the mickey out of the Prime Minister, and then you had the Mike Yarwood show that did all the people, but it was much more sort of affectionate. Whereas Spitting Image it's like a little bit, when the young ones first came on, you think, oh my God, this is like, who are these people? Of course, they're much more like real people than what was on the telly, but it's a shock when the mold is broken, and Spitting was definitely like that. When it first came on, it looked really dangerous. It looked a bit scary, It definitely broke barriers, and nobody ever directly impersonated the Queen before, for example. So that was a first. But yeah, and then, lately QI, the great thing about QI is I'm not a rabidly ambitious, determined person that I was in my 20s and 30s. I'm, easygoing. I want people to be happy. I want the people that I work with to feel that they're appreciated. And that's much more important to me than winning prizes, It's completely different to the way I used to be. And I'm happy to say that generally they are. We have amazing people. And if I usually get asked to do a speech on a wrap party, I'll say, look, I've been doing this job for 45 odd years, and this is the nicest bit of the job I've ever had. The people are amazing. Everybody really believes in what they do. We're doing something that makes a difference, not just entertaining, but is educating people by stealth. If you were 10 when QI started back in the early 2000s, that's where you got your general knowledge from. It's slightly got into the culture, which is entirely accidental. But so that's good. It's a lovely show. It's a lovely show to be part of. So they're all different, and there are shows. There's 2 radio shows that I started in the 70s that are still going. The News Quiz, which I started in 1977, which goes on and on reinventing itself. And quote unquote, the Quotations Quiz with Nigel Rees, which is on its sort of 23rd producer or something, still going. He's asked me back to do the 500th edition, which can be interesting. So,
wow. Congratulations. Who do you admire? If you look across, who out there, well, let me ask you a slightly different question rather than admire. But first of all, who has been the greatest influence on your career and why?
It's really odd this. I've never been a sort of hero worship kind of person. I don't really think like that. I've never, again, perhaps because I'm ornery and cantankerous, but I remember when we were doing Not the 9 O'Clock News, Monty Python was the thing that, when I was a student, we all watched. We all knew Monty Python off by heart. So the whole thing of Not the 9 O'Clock News was try and be as different from Python as we possibly could. And if possible, which we sometimes did, to take the piss out of them, So I'm always trying to do stuff that nobody's done before, not done in the same way. So I'm not happy copying people. So people that I admire, Attenborough. I think a great deal of Attenborough. I think he's a really properly good guy. And obviously there are plenty of people whose comedy I massively, I love everything Bill Bailey does. Sean Locke is hilarious. I mean, Ramesh Ranganathan, I think Nish Kumar's a brilliant stand-up. There's so many people I like. But it's like, yeah, I mean, I like them, and I like them often as people too, but it's like, I never have been the kind of person of either being jealous or I wish I was as good as so-and-so. And I don't ever see myself as really, I'm not competing with anyone else. One of my favorite words in English is autotelic, which means worth doing for its own sake. So I'm focused on the work. I'm trying to do what I do as well as I possibly can and not look over my shoulder. I think it's one of the most pernicious things about life, and particularly modern life, particularly social media life, is caring what other people think about you. It's a really important thing that a grown-up does the right thing because it's the right thing to do and doesn't care what other people think. That's the way to be. There is no other. And people, that's the thing. People thinking they've got 10 million friends on Facebook or Instagram, whatever. These are not friends. These are that's not what a friend is. A friend is somebody you can stay up all night talking to, and a friend is on a par with you, is not a follower or a slave. It's a ridiculous need. It's a sad need that somebody would feel validated by how many followers they've got on social media. Similarly, in the financial sector, a guy who's already earning 50 million a year needs to earn 65 million next year because the guy in the next office earns 63 million. That is ludicrous, isn't it? It's obviously clearly a complete waste of your life and your energy, but it subsumes an awful lot of people.
So you mentioned, in terms of what drives you, you mentioned earlier, fueled by, I think, if I quote you correctly, fueled by resentment, I think was the phrase, but that if someone had, sacked you or you felt you'd been wronged in some way, you were driven to prove that point, and that had fueled much of that earlier drive. But in terms of that absolute focus on doing what you wholeheartedly believe in is the right thing, what is it that drives you? What is it that keeps you coming back to creating? And because it in and of itself, I would imagine it's a demanding, it arguably exhausting, mentally draining experience to have to go through.
Yeah, when we were doing Spitting Image, Roger Law and Peter Fluck had a friend who was a very good journalist called Lewis Chester, who worked at the Sunday Times, and they commissioned him to write a book about telling the story of how the series came to be. It was called Tooth and Claw. And Lewis did some really serious interviews with all of us. And at the end of the process, he says to me, John, I understand what's driving all these other people. Roger and Peter, for example, are dirt poor. They're of a certain age. This is really their last chance to get enough money to buy a house, And the other producers, I understand what's driving them, but I don't know what's driving you. What is it that's driving you to work these insane hours and to be, this craziness that I see in you? And I said, I don't know. I had no idea. And I still don't really know what that was. But I'm not that person anymore. I'm not personally ambitious. I'm not driven except to do what I do as well as I possibly can and try and be a bit nicer to people. That's really, I don't feel, it's great not to have that hanging over you. I mean, if I go to an awards, this is a really cool thing, I think. I go to an awards, if I win one, that's really great. If I don't win one, that's great. That's fine. It doesn't impact on me at all, really. That's a big step, for somebody who valued their life on awards. When I fell to pieces in my early 40s, you can see my office here. It's just books and photographs of the kids and knickknacks. There aren't any awards there. But at 42, 41, that's what my office was. I did have books, obviously, but all the wall space was taken up with prizes, which is how I saw myself. I'm a kind of guy who wins prizes that other people think well of. I look back and I think I can't even understand how I got into that position and why I would think it was worthwhile. But I mean, I was, I suppose, normal. I don't think it is normal to go to an awards ceremony where you're up for a prize and to be indifferent to whether you win or not, in the nicest way. It's not that I don't care, but I won't take it personally if I win or lose, because it's like, it's this thing, the question of why are we here, Lee, we were talking about earlier. So I had 15 years of extraordinary success. I had the kind of Midas touch. Every show I did was a massive hit. But particularly the 10 years in television, Not the 9 O'Clock News, Spitting Image, Blackadder in a string. And then after I got back from Hollywood, almost like, it was like somebody turned a knob, a dial. Almost the day that I did the I Ching, which says either go and do the job or stay home and undertake the internal, everything started going wrong. I was sacked from Barclaycard, this amazing series I'd done with Rowan that won all the prizes. There was a film company that somebody was going to set up that they decided to fire me from. And having won awards, like said, I need to get a bigger garage to put them all in, you know. But in 1993, I stopped winning awards. And I didn't win anything for 10 years. Nothing I did was any good or had any success at all. Everything was a failure. Lots of great ideas. Some of them really, it's sad they never happened. But my external life was complete failure.
What do you think you learned from that experience?
Okay, well, here's the thing that everybody ought to know. Nobody ever learned anything from success. You only learn from failure. I'm lucky because it looks like I've been very successful, but actually I've been much more of a failure. It's the things you don't see. When you think about it, I mean, how many things can you list that I've done? 6? It's not a lot for somebody who's pushing 70, you know. It's not a lot of things. Some of them are quite long things, but they are still things. But the number of things, the number of times I've been fired, you know, unfairly sacked, the number of people who've gone on to be multimillionaires as a direct result of what I've done that I haven't participated in, these have caused me a lot of grief back in the day. Not now. I now see, because here's my thing. In my view, the universe is a teaching machine, all right? So I spent 15 years learning some good things: to be courageous, to be original, to be intelligent, to be hardworking, to be not give up too easily. Those things are very good to learn. And that's what got my success. And then, as it were, if you think of the universe as a kind of AI, the universe is saying, okay, you've ticked all those boxes now, and then the little music starts to do, welcome to level 2. It's like a video game. You go to level 2. Okay, so now you're in a different exam now. We know that you're intelligent, determined, creative, and courageous. Now you need to learn a few other things. How about cheerfulness, John? You're a gloomy sod. How about cheering up? How about being a bit nicer to people while you're being so determined and courageous? How about humility? How about not taking credit for things quite so often? You know, how about thinking about what really matters rather than these stupid bits of cardboard under glass that you collect? So then, and of course, when you're in this, all you think is my life's fallen to bits and I'm very unhappy and I don't know why. And it took me a long time to work out. Looking back on it, I think, okay, that's good. And I learned some things. I have learned those things. I am more cheerful. You know, I am a nicer, you know, I do try to be nicer. You know, I don't worry about things that aren't important to the same degree. So I feel in my life that nothing is wasted. The things where things go wrong, you're learning, you know, you're still learning. Somebody said, you know, just because a tree has no leaves on it in winter doesn't mean it's not still growing. You know, it's just what is apparent is not real. You know, the tree's fine just because that's what leaves do in the winter. They fall off and they grow new ones. So that's when things are going badly, you're learning in a different way.
It's an interesting perspective I find on the world in which we find ourselves, where, you know, these little blocks of insight into people's lives that we enjoy through social media would oftentimes lead us to believe. And I think that's arguably why the subject of mental health has become more prevalent or is becoming more greatly and widely discussed. Because we've gotten to this point where they're through these little palettes and windows into people's worlds, which would lead us to believe that there are a group of people who constantly have their shit together.
Yeah.
You know, they live in this sort of perpetuate this perfect myth of a perfect life and all that would entail. Oftentimes from a material perspective or a physical perspective, but we're led to believe, I think particularly for a younger generation coming through, that they're led to believe that there is a shit together world that is everybody other than them. And that becomes incredibly, I think, crushing for a lot of younger people. And to your point, it's only through talking with people such as yourself. You know, if I were to go online and research you, for example, it reads like a who's who of great success, of great hits. You know, but to your point, when you start to peel beneath the layers, you realize that life is back to what we said from the outset. It's a series of ups and downs.
Yeah.
And the challenge is what you learn from the highs as much as what you learn from the lows. And that ability to roll with the punches is the human experience. And I think has it become harder for people to understand that, because the weight of expectation through these little windows into people's worlds that we now enjoy has made it more difficult, I think, for a generation coming through?
Well, I think possibly the whole of Western civilization, if it's like Gandhi said, somebody said to him, "What do you think of Western civilization, Mahatma?" And he goes, "I think it would be a good idea." And I think we're going through a major crisis of meaning at the moment in a way that I think is worse than it's ever been in some ways. Because, if in my life, growing up in the 50s, you're British and we won, that's enough to make you go with a song in your heart. We're the best country in the world. That's what we are. We don't have any money. The place is covered in bomb craters, but we won. And we did a very brave thing, and we stood up to the bad guys. And in the 60s, you've got, this is swinging London, Liverpool, the best music in the world, the best movies, fantastic time to be there. 70s, wonderful, punk rock, the face, just a cool city, a bit messy London and very sort of urban and shambolic, but great fun to be young in. 80s, everybody's making money and it's the big bang in the city and suddenly the economy's picking up and all that. Even the 90s had something going for it, but it's bleak now, isn't it? And I think nobody is setting a philosophical agenda or political agenda. Nobody's got any intelligent thing who's in charge of saying, this is the kind of country I want to see. I want to see a country which is fair. I want to see a country where there aren't people who've got hundreds of billions they can't possibly spend, which they're keeping to themselves. I want to see a thing where the pointlessness of the prison system is reformed. Prison's just a crime factory, It's a horrible experience, and it teaches people they can't escape from it. Education is hopeless. We don't educate children properly. We're wasting their lives. If you look at what they do in Finland, for example, do you know Finnish children have no homework? It's considered completely mad that they have to go home and do more work, so they don't have homework, and as a result, they have the best school results in the world. Everybody loves going to school because they have a nice life.
That's interesting.
Nobody thinks originally, and I think regardless of the political situation right now, as somebody who used to get gloomy and then got seriously depressed for about 10 years, if you say life is shit, my life is shit, my work is shit, my marriage is shit, and the world is horrible. It's full of wars and disease and, darkness. And that's true. And it's a perfectly logical position to be angry and depressed about the world. On the other hand, the world's brilliant. Conversation is brilliant. Food is brilliant. The weather is amazing. Just have a look at a squirrel and, tell me whether you care whether we invent artificial intelligence or not. I mean, a squirrel or even anything, an insect, a tree is like, what? Look at that. That's what QI does for you. I don't get up. There's no day I don't get up and I suddenly look at a daisy and I go, oh my God, look at that. That's absolutely, and especially a thing that moves around, like a chaffinch or whatever. And then, to be alive, look at my hand. I've got 2 of these. What a hand can do, all the things, the number of tools you'd have to have. Steven Pinker makes this point in his book, The Blank Slate. A hand it's got everything. It's got everything from a monkey wrench to, he makes a list of all the tools that a hand can copy. To have those is extraordinary. And yet we forget it, we don't think our knees are amazing until we bang one or we get a bad knee and have to have one replaced. And then you think, I never thanked my knees all those years. I just thought they were just rather odd-shaped things. It's like, it's an attitudinal thing. I mean, most misery is self-inflicted, It's like as people often, I've never been to India, but reports say that a lot of people living on rubbish dumps and so on with nothing. They have nothing, but they are cheerful because they have a philosophy behind them. They believe It's just part of the wheel. They're going to come back next time and they're going to be a Maharaja or a dolphin. And, you've got to see out your time. That's your job, and might as well be cheerful while you do it. So it's an attitude shift. The thing is, everybody gets trouble sooner or later. But what distinguishes the people who are living properly and the people who are not are the people who have the right attitude towards it.
I agree. I mean, I think the thing that intrigued me is that the intensity with which you work, the pace at which you work, the demands that something like QI places upon you, maybe not necessarily just simply in the physical sense, but in the emotional, in the mental sense. What do you do to get away from it all? Can you get away from it all?
No, not really. I don't really. I've never been any good at beach holidays. I literally can't lie on a towel and sunbathe. I've never done that. Don't even enjoy it. I have to be doing something, getting on a boat and driving around the bay, or going to look at something, or get a notebook and draw things, anything like that. But the thing is, because I do and always have done something I love, which is what I would recommend to anyone, don't ever do anything just for the money. It's a complete disaster. You won't be happy that way. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Do something you love, and then you may not have a lot of money, but you will be happy. But you also have a chance of getting really rich. It's the people who really do what they love, who write the great novel or paint the great painting or start the great business. They get much richer than any salaryman. Not many of them, but, enough to make it. And Van Gogh never had any money all through his life, and then he supposedly sold one painting or whatever, but it doesn't matter. He lived an amazing life, and look what he's done. He'll live forever, that guy. But no, so unwinding, the thing is, I did a thing for, there's a magazine called The Lady, who used to have the next door office to us in Covent Garden. They're very sweet people. And they did one of those kind of, my 10 favorite things kind of, one of those profile pieces. And one of them was, what makes you really happy? And I asked my wife what makes me really happy. And she said, doing pure QI research. That's what I do. So as you know, we've just been on a yoga retreat. And what yoga is about is, ultimately, it's to try and still the chatter in the mind that we talked about, to get to the point where you're not thinking about yourself all the time. That's what all the positions are in yoga. And the meditation, the mantras, or however you do it, is to try to stop this endless wibbling on that goes on in your mind and get to a sort of sense of calm. And I always do feel much calmer. But our teacher always says, the idea of this is so if you can live the life, you don't need to meditate. If you live a meditative life, which is what I do, because if I do QI research, I get out, I'm doing something really interesting, something that I didn't know anything about. So 2 or 3 days ago, I was researching the Torres Strait Islands. Okay, so because the next series of QI, assuming there is one, is all about the letter T. So I'm doing anything with T in it. So yesterday I did Trammell Crow. Ever heard of him? I'm betting not.
I want to say yes, but couldn't tell you why, which of itself is a lame response.
Okay, so Trammell Crow is the greatest real estate developer in the United States, and the greatest one that there has ever been.
Okay, so the reason the name was familiar was that going back in the dim and distant past, actually, I did some work with them.
Did you?
There was a business, Trammell Crow.
Trammell Crow Company, exactly, yeah.
Yes.
So I'd never heard of this bloke, and I came across on some newsfeed his name. I thought, it's an interesting name. I wonder who he is. So I spent the whole of yesterday finding out about who he was and what he was like. And he's a great guy. I would have loved to have met him. And the Torres Strait Islands, fascinating. They're the islands that are just north of Cape York in Australia, the pointy bit, and north of Australia, between that and Papua New Guinea. Absolutely fascinating. And so... Are they
inhabited?
Yeah.
Are they?
Yes, and by some great people whose artwork is particularly astonishingly good and who don't like tourism. There are no hotels anywhere on the Torres Strait Islands, and we were staying with my friend Griff Rhys-Jones for the weekend, who was the guy who turned me on to this, because he wanted to make a documentary about their art. And he went all the way to the Torres Strait Islands, got off the boat and went to see the chief. And the interpreter was there. And the chief, Griff said, Chief, your art in these islands is among the best in the world. And we'd love to make a documentary about it. And the chief goes, blah, 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 blah. And the interpreter says, Griff said, what does he say? And the interpreter said, no, we wish you'd go away. So they went away. Anyway, they're fascinating because they have land records going back hundreds of years, which are not written down, but they're done by some sort of markings. With the result, they got their land back from the Australians. They were annexed in 1879, and they won a court battle to get their own land back. So they're a sort of semi-independent country. And they do this great artwork, and as a result of their art, there was a guy called Alfred Court Haddon that Griff mentioned. Said, look him up. So I did. And this is the guy who founded the study of anthropology. For 30 years, he was banging on about this. People say, why would we want to do that? And he created the School of Anthropology at Cambridge. As a result of going to he was a marine biologist, this bloke, and he went to the Torres Strait Islands to study coral and, marine life forms, and quickly decided that the people were much more interesting than the fish, and sort of fell in love with the place and came back and said, he wrote a huge amount about this, that in his view, there was, nor had there ever been, a people who were less intelligent or less creative than any other. This was such a move forward, you know what I mean? That these guys, even though they're only wearing loincloths, when you looked at their art and you heard their ideas and you listened about their mythology, human nature has not changed. And this is why any kind of racism is ridiculous. Just because people look different or they've got a different skin color or they don't speak your language doesn't mean they're just equally intelligent and equally creative as anyone anywhere. And that's what I particularly love about the QI process, is something you've never heard of and you've written off as, because you haven't heard of it, you think it's not important, turns out to be one of the most important places in the world in terms of human development. And so if you're doing that every day, I'm doing basically, it is, because meditation is about stilling the chatter, I don't think about myself sometimes for 10 hours a day. I'm so busy off with the fairies and some other points, we're trying to understand how a piece of stuff works. I'm in the zone, Lee, if you know what I mean. That thing when you're so absorbed in what you do that time dilates and you forget who you are. That's where I am most of the day. It's actually very good for you. But if I do relax, at the moment, certainly since I've always liked cooking a bit, but I haven't usually had time. And lockdown has given, if you're lucky enough to have a nice lockdown and a garden to cook, I do a lot, and that I find also very enjoyable. And again, it's not about me. I'm not thinking about me if I'm making an apple tart or a, roast lunch or something. You're just so focused on making these roast potatoes as good as they can possibly be. It's very rewarding cooking because it's so nice to cook for people, particularly people you like.
All of those things to which you refer are absolutely synonymous with present moment living, aren't they? Absolutely absorbed in that one moment, which is the only true real moment. We get absorbed in our thoughts as to the past or the future, but fundamentally, it's all about now. The things that you describe afford you that meditative life by being very, very much present in the moment.
But there's two kinds of everything, aren't there? I mean, there's two kinds of cooking. There's going to the supermarket and getting a ready meal and sticking it in the oven, worse, the microwave, and then, boiling up some peas or whatever and eating it and then getting on with your job. And there's cooking in the moment of really doing something, chopping that onion and then the pepper and then, and tidying up afterwards and then the herbs and then, making sure the rice is exactly so, and then making something with complete attention and love, which I think are very similar things. Attention and love are similar. And for no purpose other than that it's a good thing to do. Because my wife is very hardworking and she loves to be cooked for. She loves it, and it's such a pleasure for her to say, well, this is so tasty. I made this savory rice we particularly like, and for some reason, the recipe was for 3 people. So the third portion, she's taken off in a Tupperware container to have her lunch in London. How lovely is that? She used up the leftovers. It's just great. And it's like this, it's not purposive. It's not about ambition. It's not about nobody else will know. It's just doing it because it's the right thing to do. That's very, very pleasing, I find.
So what advice might you give, with the benefit of hindsight, what advice might you give 21-year-old John Lloyd?
I think probably the thing that when I first went to public school, King's Canterbury, and you had an intake house, so we were all kids, all 13, 14, and they had a prefect in charge of us. And the bloke in charge of our thing says, you know what, Lloyd? You shouldn't worry so much. You worry too much. You always see this frown, and that I wish somebody did tell me that at 14, and I just ignored them, I'm afraid. I went on worrying, and I still do worry. Not as much as I used to, but I do still worry about things. So don't worry is one thing. To have no fear, to be much braver than you think you can be. To again, if you're scared, that's a good thing, because it shows, everybody should scare themselves a bit, do things that are outside their comfort zone. I would certainly say, which is something I learned from university, things are much more possible than you think. You actually can do anything. So the thing to do is to take complete responsibility for your own life, and particularly don't give up. That's what failure is people giving up too soon. They think, this is too difficult, I can't do this. And we've all been there as children. You see it, I can't do this, it's too difficult. Don't whinge. Of course it's going to be difficult. If it was easy to write a best-selling novel or to produce a movie that everybody loves, everybody would be doing it. It would have got around what the trick is. There is no trick. The trick is that there is no trick. It's all about determination and hard work, much more than about talent. You don't need a lot of talent, particularly somebody like me. You basically don't need any talent at all. The only talent I really have is I know who's good. I know what I like, and I know I can see that actor's a good actor, and that person really should be, considering van driving as a career. Not to disparage van drivers, because I say, if you're going to be a van driver, be the best van driver. That's the thing. That's all. I mean, I think it's mainly that. That's, I say, is like, I find work difficult, and so I don't see the point in doing indifferent work, since it's all difficult. It's difficult to do things at all. So you might as well try and do something really difficult and that really matters.
So what does the future look like for you?
Well, I'm just, again, these things, if you cut them too short, they sound pious, but I genuinely am grateful for what I have, and I try and remind myself of that every day. So, for example, the day before we went on this yoga retreat, of all embarrassing things to do, I put my back out. I'm the only one in our family who doesn't have a bad back, but I was leaning down to pick something up, and it went twang. And that thing, I don't know if you ever had this, but lower back where you suddenly catches an edge and you're in spasm, and it's absolutely agonizing. And you have to grab a wall or a piece of furniture. So I was sitting, I couldn't really do any of the yoga. I'd just sit and, watch everyone else do it. And it's getting better, and I'm so grateful, because obviously being a yoga retreat is full of osteopaths and, people who do Pilates all got advice, and they've all got rubbing your shoulders and all this. Oh, this might take months, John. Could take years. Well, it hasn't. It's only been just over a week. And I'm so grateful that I'm okay about my back, I'm genuinely, because sometimes, the thing I have a thing that you going through your address book and, oh my God, they died. Oh, I'd forgotten. He died and she died. It's like this, you get to a certain age, there's a lot of people on my phone who aren't with us anymore. I can't delete their names. Do you have that? If you know someone who's died, I can't, it seems like I'm superstitious about it. I think of Douglas Adams, who was only 49 when he died. That's 20 years ago. All those 20 years that I've had that he didn't have, that's to be grateful for. If my children are well, if I think, I'm going to have a pizza with my son tonight in London, which I'm really looking forward to, just the two of us, just have a bit of a natter, glass of wine. Pizza's our favourite thing, always has been. That's such a treat. And, I manage his band, he's called Waiting for Smith. He's really, really good. He writes amazing songs. So we've got a festival season coming up for the first time in the last couple of years. So he's playing some pretty big gigs and I'm doing talks and so on. So that will be great fun. I'll really look forward to that aspect of the summer. But no, so I'm, it's much more. I was talking to Richard Curtis about this the other day. I don't know if you've had him on, have you?
I haven't, no.
He's a very good guy. He's had an amazing life. I would say I really admire Richard Curtis. I'm happy to say that in public. When you're going back to David Attenborough, I think Richard has really squeezed the lemon of his life. He's done these extraordinary pieces of work and he's done comic relief. He's a net contributor in a major way. But we were chatting the other day and he said, I got to a certain age where I'm not personally ambitious anymore. I just want to help other people. And it sounds a bit creepy, but I feel the same way. I really like being in a position to help people. Today, Sarah, my wife, is interviewing a whole bunch of new interns. We've got a position that we're getting a bit of help financially with to give a new person a job, which is really exciting when you find somebody. And because QI's the culture of it is we find the best people we can and then we encourage them a lot. It isn't you're hired to do a certain thing. Everyone does research, but we like to find out what people didn't know they could do. So we've got in the company all these people who came as nerdy researchers, graphic designers, cameramen, film directors, theatre directors, performers, podcasters, book editors. They've got amazing skills. They've all developed them since they arrived. That's absolutely thrilling to see. And I wish I'd done that before I'd become a parent. I'd have been a much better parent if I'd known that's the way to be with kids, like their grandparents are. Encourage them. Be nice every day. Be pleased to see them. Tell them they're great. That's all you need to do as a parent. And nobody does it. It's like, get off that. Darren, get off that. Stop that. No, don't do that. Don't do this. We've got a thing upstairs, which is a fun thing I did when the kids were little. It's called the auto parent bathroom. Okay, I should show it to you one day. So I had these tiles made by a bloke in Staffordshire. I wrote the copy for the tiles and we had them specially made and it came in crates of these things. And so it's the bathroom does the shouting for you as a parent so you don't have to. So it says things like, not before lunch, have you cleaned your teeth, where are your slippers, you dirty little boy, stop that, get off that, don't touch that. And little children come in aged 5 and they're helpless with laughter because they get immediately, well, this is what bath time's like. Lots of criticism and lots of nice as well. Night, night, darling, sleep tight. It's, I don't know how you would market that, but it amuses me anyway. Because we were so hopeless when we started. As you are, you have to learn on the job. And it's a shame because it doesn't really matter if you muck up a program. It does matter a lot if you mess up somebody's life by giving them terminal anxiety or anger or something like that. But, sorry,
John,
we haven't done much jokes. We haven't done many jokes, have we, Lee? Never mind.
Well, don't worry. No, this has been fascinating. It's offered a tremendous insight. And if there's one thing that I would take away, not least, it's that present moment living, which is something that I think particularly in earlier life, I was always living in tomorrow. Tomorrow will be, if I do this today, something will happen tomorrow. It's always about tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a better day. So I just keep moving forward, progressing towards a goal that ultimately was, the goal was only about getting to the next goal.
Yeah.
Ultimately was not always that fulfilling. You'd reach that goal and think, well, so I bloody well should because I worked blooming hard. And if you didn't achieve it, the world would end because you didn't reach that goal. And I think if there's one thing that I'm learning is that need for present moment living is absolutely essential. And also the consistent theme through much of what you've described is best surmised in my view as the simplest things that we typically would take for granted. Your point around the knee, the chaff inch, the hand, the moment that you find yourself in, that of themselves are the miracle of life, if we put it in those terms, are the most wonderful things that we can enjoy, and yet oftentimes, so often, are missed. And I think that's a great lesson from which all of us could take from your time today, John. And I've really appreciated and really enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you. It's a huge privilege and a real pleasure. And many, many thanks.
Lee, it's been absolute pleasure meeting you, talking to you, and having your insights. It's great because, you've sent me off on curves that I didn't expect to go on, which is always good, I think, rather than repeating oneself. And I mean, I think, again, the trouble with the great things that people don't know and they ought to know, like live in the moment, it sounds like, I say, a piece of piety and a piece of some sort of hallmark card, It doesn't mean anything, but it's completely true because you can't fix the past. It's gone, So forget going on about what happened to you, what your mother did to you when you were 5 or, what happened last week. And the future may never happen. You might, get run over by an 18-wheeler in 2 hours' time. So don't get this. That's all you have is the moment. This moment now, to be completely attentive. And it's very rewarding when you are. That's like that everything else just goes away. And I think, again, saying what I would say to other people, to 21-year-old self, is like, seize the hour, do it. Let's do this. Come on, and again, we spend far too much time reading the papers and getting cross about what other people are doing. There's nothing you can do about that, what they're doing in Ethiopia or whatever. There's nothing you can do to stop it. The only thing you have any control over is your own mind. So get attending to that. Fix yourself first before you fix everybody else. And, there's so much, obviously we could talk about the meaning of everything. But I think it's important for anybody who may catch this, who thinks that there's some sort of secret to conventional success. That isn't the case. It's that it is open to anyone. I would love, if I lived to be 100, and some of my family, my mum's mum lived to 108. So if I lived to be 100, I'd like somebody in that 100th year, 30 years from now, to say to me, you know what? I heard this podcast with you and Lee Cooper when I was 15, and I thought, I'm going to do this. And that's why I am now, whatever he is, an architect or whatever. Wouldn't it be great? Just have one person to say that anybody can do this. You've just got to have the courage and the determination to keep going beyond the point it gets painful. Because, the potential of the human race is so huge. It's why I'm so fascinated by education. We're teaching people all wrong. Everybody should come out of school at 18 full of curiosity and amazing understanding and, just loving their life. And they don't. They're kind of like, we're teaching people all the wrong things in the wrong way.
So I have a theory on this, John. Do you think that this is a broad sweeping generalization for which I will arguably apologize, but nonetheless, that our system of education was designed with the Industrial Revolution in mind? So what was required of us through that time was to get typically men, large groups of men and women, but typically men, to be able to stand in a line, to take instruction, not to question that instruction, and then to perform a series of repeatable tasks over and over and over and over again, and stop and go home. And so, that's what transformed and gave us much, economically, gave us industrial might, gave us a position in the world, enabled us to establish a structure and a framework of conformity and uniformity that worked for many, many years, and created also as a consequence a series of haves and have, those that have and those that don't, from a material perspective. And that kind of suits And it's difficult to unravel and it's difficult to unpick because it's painful politically. Arguably, the political party that takes that step will be the one that sees a natural, back to what we were talking about from earlier on around measurement and performance. So you become, because of a dramatic shift in how we educate, unlocks potentially in the short term a series of downward performances in the traditional metrics. So you end up with a perceived slipping in standards of education. Politically, that's suicidal. So no political party wants to take that pain. Even though it might be for the greater good, politics is about what is it that we can do today that means tomorrow we get re-elected and retain that seat of power. That is what I simplistically think it has become. It hasn't become about the greater good that historically was once the premise from which it was born. It's become about power and control. So everything kind of needs to be reinvented, re-engineered for the world in which we now find ourselves. And it arguably hasn't kept pace. And that's not a criticism of teachers or teaching. Some wonderful people are teachers. But I just think the system into which we've developed and evolved is no longer arguably fit for purpose in terms of the direction of travel the world is headed. And therein, I think, lies a whole podcast in itself. But there endeth the lesson. There you go. The insight. That's the limited insight that I can afford us this afternoon.
Not at all. I agree with all that. Lee, it's been a blast. Thank you so much.
Likewise, John, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Genuinely, it's been a huge privilege. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I wish you every continued success in all that you have going on, and I should continue to be a very, very, very entertained listener and watcher of all that you're doing. And my thanks for your time this afternoon.
It's a pleasure, Lee. See you soon.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.